Okay, good day, guys. Just want to speak a little bit about the leaked recordings involving the JFF and Damian Lowe, and of course, the response of the JFF president to the controversy. Of course, you guys know that the recording involved pay negotiations between Lowe, who was supposed to be a liaison between the players and the federation, and the JFF hierarchy, and this was regarding pay for the recent games against Saudi Arabia. First of all, Lowe must be commended for the way he handled the meeting. For he alone to be up against 4 or 5 JFF board members, he really held his own. One could even argue that he was the most rather, professional of all the parties involved. Which, truth be told, is really sad when you think about it. But I personally think that the JFF looks really bad in this situation. I mean, to say the JFF looks extremely unprofessional in this audio is an understatement. Basically, the Federation and Lowe were discussing a COVID risk allowance, and basically Lowe made a proposal to the JFF of $2,000 for players who play more than 30 minutes in each game, and $1,500 for players who play less than 30 minutes, of which the JFF basically stated that they could not afford this, that it was impossible to agree to his proposal. Their counter proposal was $1,500 for players who play for more than 30 minutes in each game, and $1,000 for players who play less than 30 minutes. From my understanding of it, this is in addition to $500 base pay and per diem, which is $100 per day. To be honest with you, this in and of itself is ridiculous, because watching an interview with former reggae boy Ricardo Fuller recently, who was stating that over 20 years ago he was being paid $2,000 to $3,000 as base pay per game to play for the Reggae Boys, and that it baffles him that 20 years on, this is what players are currently being paid, less than that which he was receiving 20 years ago. And that is obviously very ridiculous. It must be stated that the $500 base pay is something that would have been taking place even previously to the coronavirus pandemic. Now, in interviews post this tape being leaked, the JFF has admitted that the Federation is strapped for cash, and for the most part is blaming COVID-19 for the Federation currently being strapped for cash. But to be honest with you, I'm not buying this, because this Federation always seems to be strapped for cash even before the COVID-19 virus struck, sadly. Sadly, the reality of the matter is that this is nothing new for the Federation to be struggling to pay its players. This issue has arisen on a number of occasions prior. So it is really difficult to give the Federation, or to give the Federation's COVID excuse the benefit of the doubt, as this current administration has shown an inability to generate revenue. And I will speak on the reasons why I think this is happening later on in the video, when I speak on the pathetic response of the Federation's president to this latest JFF scandal. But it certainly isn't a good look when the Federation is crying that it is strapped for cash, and allegedly players have to fly economy all the way to Saudi Arabia, but all the board members Some of them who really and truly don't even need to go are all flying in business class, especially given the fact that the players are the ones who really need to fly business class to allow them the leg space over such a long distance to prevent injury, right? One of the things though that really stood out to me and stood out to many people was the unfortunate comments made in the audio by Bruce Gaynor, who is the vice president of the federation. He was on the audio shouting and saying in a very angry and condescending tone, "If you think this is a potty shop, we're running," and telling Damien to come off of this thing, man. And then leaving the chat midway the negotiation. And of course, this angry tirade was indeed directed at Damian Lowe. The JFF, in an interview on Sportsmax, or the JFF president rather, in an interview on Sportsmax, stated that Mr. Gaynor was upset with Damian demanding explanations relating to the COVID-19 fund. Now, I must tell you I disagree with this assertion. In my opinion, listening to that, Damian was just making the argument that players had an idea as to that the players had an idea as to the financial makeup of the JFF. And at the very least, the players had the ability to gain further insight into the finances of the federation on the basis of making a request for certain information. And this could be used for the players to make a determination as to whether they were being treated fairly and reasonably. And in my opinion, he clearly was not requesting the JFF pay the players using the COVID relief funds obtained by FIFA. And I certainly don't think anything would be wrong with this. The mere fact that Mr. Gaynor did not recognize this was what Damian was saying is probably just a misunderstanding. However, my problem and many people's problem with this exchange was obviously the arrogant and demeaning manner in which he chose to address Damian, which was honestly just totally uncalled for and very disrespectful. The fact is that if he had an ounce of professionalism and respect for the process of players negotiating their pay and for the individual on the other side of the negotiating table, he would not have made this outburst. The attitude basically says to me that Mr. Gaynor doesn't think that the players should be negotiating their pay. They should just take what they get and don't question it. And obviously, this cannot work in today's day and age. The fact is, players or anyone for that matter has a right to negotiate their salary. And an employer or potential employer, of course, has the right to decline. Mike Ricketts at this point stepped in and stated that we are going to have to take some serious actions because it just cannot work. We just cannot sit and allow the players to make demands. First of all, I would love to know what does Mike Ricketts mean when he says take some serious actions. Is this a threat of punishment? If this is so, this is really sad. And in response to that, Damian rightly hit back, it's negotiating. What do you mean? How you mean is it demands? Again, very sad. This is the attitude of the JFF hierarchy. It is very sad that this is the attitude. The fact is, again, the players are well within their right to negotiate, and threatening to punish them for doing so is just wrong and honestly corrupt. Also, probably if they were paying the players what they really and truly deserve, they wouldn't have to endure such a difficult negotiating process. The JFF president even went as far as saying further on in the exchange that they didn't have to pay players anything and that some countries don't pay their players anything. People, what madness, right? What a stupid statement. As if Jamaica is some small country ranked 150th in the world with a population of 100,000 people. The fact of the matter is that we are an established nation with national players starring in the English Premier League, the German Bundesliga, the Belgian Pro League, and the MLS. Again, this is madness. And I was shocked, really and truly shocked when I heard the JFF president say this. And Damien's response to this was, but we are ranked number 3 in CONCACAF and the top 50 team in the world. We have to get paid according to how we are ranked. And he's not wrong. Another issue that was made apparent by the leaked recordings is the condescending manner in which the JFF addresses its players, even when in a professional environment such as a meeting. When you have JFF board members saying to the player's representative, "Listen to me, son," right? Addressing him as little youth and me little soldier, and trying to use moral suasion and the strength of their relationships with the young man to try and use the young man to to do their personal bidding. Even going as far as telling the young man that technically he was a part of management, which is so funny. You know, that's obviously jive, right? And trying to coach him as to what to say, and even outright instructing him as to what to report back to his colleagues, and trying to abuse the power dynamics coupled with the young man's desire to represent his country and their ability to prevent him from representing his country was just downright disrespectful and has no place in a professional environment. The fact of the matter is, this is not some little corner store, right? This is the business of the nation's football, and it should be treated accordingly in a serious and professional manner. And this was clearly not being done here. The fact is, Lowe was appointed by his colleagues to be a liaison between the board and the players. It is not consistent with his duties to be unreasonably trying to persuade his colleagues to accept the proposed deal. It is just not. You know, something else that struck me as very interesting in the audio was when one of the board members stated that currently the federation does not have a sponsor. And in the interview that Mike Ricketts did, he tried to pass this off as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course is currently causing mayhem and mischief the world over. On the one hand, you can understand and sympathize with this point, to be honest with you. But on the other hand, this JFF administration has had a long-standing issue with generating revenue for the federation, long before anyone even knew what the hell COVID-19 was or that it even existed. The main reason I suspect for this is that this current JFF administration does not instill public confidence, right, in its ability to run the federation. Because the general consensus regarding this administration is that many people feel that they are incompetent incapable, unprofessional, and some may even go as far as alleging corruption. And because of this rhetoric, corporate entities are reluctant to give up their hard-earned monies to this federation. Certainly, it is reasonable for one to surmise that these corporate entities themselves does not hold this current JFF administration in high regard. One example of this can be seen in an incident occurring about a year ago when Reggae Girl sponsor, brand ambassador and daughter of reggae icon Cedella Marley accused the JFF Federation of a lack of transparency, unprofessionalism, and outright corruption. Basically, what took place was that the JFF was struggling to put together the required funds to stage a training camp for the reggae girls. And it is also important to note that this all took place in the immediate aftermath of the reggae girls being the first country from the Caribbean to play or to qualify and play in the Women's World Cup. This controversy happened basically immediately after the World Cup. Now, people, I know from stories that corporate Jamaica can be very stingy. But it is still very difficult for me to comprehend how on God's green earth the Federation had issues securing funding for a training camp for the girls to compete in the Pan Am Games right after playing in the Women's World Cup. And a number of the girls securing contracts to play for big clubs in Europe and North America, especially against the backdrop that Cedella Marley was able to secure the necessary funds for the training camp in a relatively short period of time, compared to the JFF, who had been trying to pull this off for months. Right? It took Cedella, one individual, a couple of weeks to gather the funds from the various different corporate entities. But this is not even the most shocking part of this story and the JFF's incompetence and alleged unprofessionalism and corruption. The most shocking part of this story for me and for many people is that these respective corporations or these respective corporate entities gave Cedella Marley the assurances of funding the camp on one condition, and this condition being that they would be able to pay the funds directly to the vendors. Now, people, this for me was a very shocking revelation. The fact that corporate entities clearly do not trust the JFF with their monies. No one can only speculate as to why, but the fact is there had to have been some reason for these respective corporate entities to make this demand, right? Guys, let's be real here. These corporations did not just manufacture these reasons from out of nowhere. They have to have had legitimate concerns as to what was taking place with their money. That, I think, is not up to speculation, guys. That's just facts. And of course, this condition angered the JFF and led to a standoff between themselves and Cedella. And from a PR standpoint, it is also not a good look for the Federation to be at odds publicly with a woman who single-handedly resurrected the women's program when it was dead in the water, literally dead in the water. The Federation had to abandon the women's program because of the lack of funding before Cedella stepped in. So fighting publicly with her and making ridiculous accusations that didn't even make sense against her in interviews doesn't make sense. But of course, nothing the JFS says or does rarely makes any sense. So it's incidents like this and many others that prevent people like me from giving the JFF the benefit of the doubt when it comes to their claims that COVID-19 is the reason for their lack of sponsorship for the senior men's program. We just cannot give them the benefit of the doubt because the plain truth of the matter is they have not earned it. They have not earned it, right? They have really not earned it. And this latest scandal certainly has not helped the JFF garner even an ounce of public confidence. Not even 1 ounce. Now, back to the audio. Because one of the things that Damien kept on alluding to in the leaked audio was the lack of professionalism in the way the JFF conducts its relations with the players. On one occasion, even stating that over the years we haven't been doing anything formally. We talk mouth to mouth, but basically nothing on paper, and basically begging the JFF to please respond to his emails, which is very sad, very sad. I personally picked up on the fact that every time Damien brought up the need for the negotiation process to be documented, the board members basically ignored him, in some cases going silent. Why is this so? Why do they not want a paper trail? It's clear to me that they don't. And this is a perfect segue into addressing Mike Ricketts' interview that he did with Lance Whitaker and George Davis on Sportsmax pertaining to the JFF's latest scandal. For me, what was extremely disturbing about this interview was the JFF president Mike Ricketts positing an absurd notion, right? Very absurd notion that it was not necessary to document the negotiation process, as Damien was literally begging the federation to act in a more professional manner. Mike Ricketts is basically saying that it is not necessary to document the negotiation process. That's what he said in the interview, literally. Right? And Damien was basically begging them to act in a more professional manner by sending their counter proposal via email. When pressed on this matter by George Davis, the president asked, "So what is the difference if it is in writing?" and of course, George Davis was visibly stunned by this question. On another occasion, Mike Ricketts stated, "I have been in government service for years. When you are negotiating, you don't necessarily put things in writing." To which George Davis replied, "What?" To which George Davis was so shocked, he said, "What?" Immediately, like he was so very shocked at this assertion made by the president. Right? It is comical to say the least. George Davis clearly could not believe what his ears was hearing, right? Clearly could not believe. Now, people, I find it very hard. I find it very hard to believe that Mike Ricketts genuinely believes this. Right? I find it very hard to believe this. But if he doesn't believe this, why run the risk of making yourself look even more incompetent and lowering public confidence even more than it has already been lowered? Are they that averse to leaving a paper trail that they're willing to go on an international television network and say such nonsense? But on the other hand, Mike stated that he was not sure whether or not the fees proposed to Damian was made in writing, which does indicate a culture of gross unprofessionalism, right? The fact that Mike Ricketts could not state conclusively that his team at the JFF was making written documentation of something as important as a crucial negotiating process, right? It does indicate a culture of gross unprofessionalism and that this is the norm at the JFF. Mike Ricketts' response indicates that. Mike Ricketts even tried to suggest that it was a simple casual discussion describing the negotiation as a casual precursor to the real McCoy, and also stating that we weren't negotiating a contract, stating that it was no contractual arrangement that was going on or that we were going in. We were just trying to work out a figure for a one-off game, basically stating this as a reason as to why there was no written documentation. Now, someone explain this to me. How could he not see a salary negotiation for a pair of games as the negotiating of a contract? What is he talking about? No wonder the JFF can't get any sponsors. This is absurd, right? Can you imagine the leader of a private sector organization listening to this? The conclusions they would draw from this interview about the leadership of the JFF? People, if you haven't seen the interview, I encourage you to go and watch it and have a laugh. Really and truly, just go and enjoy yourself, because it is really and truly just a ridiculous interview that Mike Ricketts gave. Right? This is absurd madness. This federation is basically in shambles and being run by a set of lunatics who know nothing about business and professional ethics or the administrative workings of a federation. Basically, them no know them head top different from them foot bottom regards to running the federation. The amount of hop, skipping and jumping that Mike Ricketts was doing in this interview was plain and simply disgraceful. Right? People, disgraceful. When he is going to label negotiations of salaries as a casual discussion, and in the same interview admit that minutes were being taken. Trust me, people. You see why people think the JFF is being run like a patty shop? Also, notice how he said when you are negotiating. How can one subconsciously acknowledge it as a negotiation and labeled it as such in the interview, but then in said interview labeled the negotiation as a casual discussion? That obviously does not make any sense. The fact of the matter is, a negotiation for salaries cannot be casual. That just doesn't make any sense, guys. A negotiation is obviously a professional setting, especially given the fact that he stated minutes were being taken. When pressed by the interviewers as to how the meeting involved so many JFF board members against Damian alone, George asked how did a private conversation between you and Damian turn into that? He stated that he doesn't usually sit in on negotiations, but this time he did just to see how things were going and made sure to emphasize that the conversation was not a private conversation between himself and Damian. And then he called others into the room to listen in on the call. But at another point in the interview, he stated subconsciously that he and Damian were having a casual discussion and it turned into something else when he was describing the negotiation on the recording. Now this just obviously does not add up. Not accusing anybody of being untruthful, but it does not add up, at least in my mind anyways. This just goes to show you how the president's story was all over the place and not making much sense. Ricketts also throughout the entire interview was trying to isolate the incident as a one-off. Annoyingly so, if I might add, using the coronavirus context. Now people, the fact is that the objective of a negotiation might be a one-off, but how negotiations must be conducted is standard. Throughout the entire interview, he was trying to confuse the two, deliberately so in my opinion, in saying that this situation cannot be compared to any other situation of how the JFF normally does negotiations or previous incidents of poor professionalism in the JFF's negotiation process, cited by critics like former reggae boy Ricardo Fuller, who would obviously be privy to the JFF's lack of professionalism regarding the negotiation process. He kept on harping on this, basically trying to make a lame excuse that the negotiation process was this poor because it was a negotiation for a one-off COVID-19 allowance, and that this was not usually how the JFF conducted its negotiations. People, this has got to be the biggest load of jive I have ever heard in my life. Throughout the entire interview, he was trying to make this point and it just kept on getting on my nerves, man. George also asked Mr. Ricketts if he would ensure that there is a standard written agreement in place about respective fees that the players are to get, because Mike Ricketts kept on saying throughout the entire interview that there was no current contract. Mr. Ricketts agreed that this indeed would be best practices and that the contract has been prepared and is now ready and that they will present it to the players in short order. Man, I honestly have to laugh. I honestly have to laugh. My question is, where was the contract all along? When you have the agent of the team's best player, one of the hottest young players in the world, saying that his client has never signed a document from the JFF, when up until that point, up until the player's agent making that statement, the player had been representing Jamaica for months. Right? Again, this is just not a good look. It is not a good look, and it really makes the JFF look as if they are indeed running a patty shop. Look how long this administration has been at the wheel. And you mean to tell me that the JFF has only now prepared this crucial standard document that I am sure every other decently run federation possesses? But of course, again, we have to remember that we are talking about the JFF here. Man, again, this interview was just one big joke and brought into sharp focus the incompetence, the downright incompetence of the current board. Mike also said something in the interview that really caught my attention though, guys, when he was using as an excuse saying that when you are moving players from all around the world, it is not easy, stating that in and of itself presented a challenge to the respective point he was making, addressing the embarrassing and public unprofessionalism surrounding the tour of Saudi Arabia. But my question to Mike Ricketts is, boss, how can you be complaining about this? This is a fundamental part of your job. That is something that you do on a regular basis. You should not be complaining about this. Again, what are you talking about? How can you be acting like moving players from all over the world presented a unique challenge because of the particular trip to Saudi Arabia? The fact of the matter is, you move players from all over the world all the time. Is that hot mess that transpired in Saudi Arabia going to happen all the time? Every time Jamaica plays a set of friendly games or travels overseas to play other countries? This man just basically admitted to his administration not being able to cope or carry out one of the Federation's most important duties. The president also expressed frustration that the conversation was, one, recorded and two, leaked, saying that it was, quote, tantamount to betrayal. Ricketts also went on to say that if he was in discussion with someone and he planned on recording them, he would indicate to them that he was going to record the conversation. And I'm not surprised by this defense. It is an obvious one that the president would draw for. To be honest with you, I can understand his point with regard to the recording being leaked. And to be fair, while I don't agree, that is a fair point. But I think his point as to being recorded without his knowledge is disingenuous. When asked by Lance Whitaker if the JFF was recording the conversation, Mike Ricketts answered no, but minutes were being taken. Now people, Mike Ricketts must think that we don't have any sense, because anyone with sense knows that when minutes are being taken, the audio of the meeting is recorded. As a matter of fact, minutes in and of itself is a form of recording. So why is it okay for you to record the meeting, but wrong for Damien to do so? Right? And you did not expressly state to Damien that you were recording the meeting either. It is also shocking that Mike Ricketts was surprised that Damien was recording the meeting. The fact is that in a professional setting, the respective parties don't need to expressly state that the meeting is being recorded. This is automatically implied by the professional context, and so the JFF should not have been caught off guard by this. It also again speaks to the lack of respect for the individual they were negotiating with, and that they grossly underestimated him, of course to their detriment. This excuse by the president shows that the Federation had ill intentions, as they wanted to have records of the process that only they could access, but didn't want to facilitate an environment that would ensure that the players had records of the process as well. Like responding to Damian's email with a written counter proposal, with the proposal being made strictly over the phone. The fact of the matter is, they were beaten at their own game. Plain and simply, they were beaten at their own game. Also, expressly stating this fact would defeat one of the main objectives of the recording, or of recording the discussion in the first place, which I suspect was to document the JFF's unprofessionalism. If it was brought to their attention, or they were wise enough to see this as a possibility given the context, they would probably have put up a front. Right? As for the leaking, sometimes sadly, this is a necessary and important function of our society in exposing and hence improving behavior. And leaking provides the crucial element of checks and balances that usually accompanies public scrutiny. And in my opinion, given the context of national importance and the gross mismanagement of the nation's footballing business, this overrides any issues surrounding trust, in my opinion. I have some advice for the Federation, right? How about the JFF just conduct itself in a manner befitting, so that they won't have to worry about being publicly embarrassed through leaks? I personally don't think this is too much to ask of them, but whether or not they are capable of improving is another issue entirely. Now guys, I sincerely hope that this does not result in arguably our best defender and captain being booted from the national program. But to be honest with you, I hold out very little hope that this will not happen. The fact is, given the past history of the JFF to behave as if the Federation is a dictatorship, I don't rule out the possibility that the Saudi Arabia Games might be the last time we see Damian Lowe represent the Reggae Boys, which would be very sad, very, very sad. But you guys remember when a little while ago, when Leon Bailey made those now infamous comments that if we don't qualify for the next World Cup, it is because of the Federation? You remember just how upset the JFF was? Right? And in my opinion, Bailey hit the nail on the head. The Federation themselves has even admitted to hampering the team's progress. Look at, for example, the first Saudi Arabia game that we lost embarrassingly 3-0. Even the JFF General Secretary himself admitted that they lost that game because of all the drama leading up to it. Now my question is, who caused that drama? Right? Who caused that drama? Rumors also being circulated that are stating that head coach Theodore Tapper Whitmore is growing increasingly frustrated by the Federation's incompetence and also sees it as the team's biggest hurdle. A coach, by the way, that they are grossly underpaying for his services, especially considering his impressive record so far. The fact is that the general consensus is that Tapper is doing a good job so far. I personally think if we had any other coach at this time, things would be much worse right now. Fact is, Tapa is the one sparing the JFS blushes. No doubt about it, in my opinion. Let's just hope for one of two things here, guys. That the board resigns, which of course we highly doubt that they will. In fact, don't hold your breath, cause I can tell you it ain't happening. And the way how they changed the voting laws, they ain't getting voted out either. Or that the players can ignore all of this nonsense and keep their eyes on the prize, which is to qualify for the next World Cup. Anyways, alright guys, remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you again for my next video. Take care.